The dusty trail stretched endlessly before Penelope Sanders as she gripped the reins of the wagon, her knuckles white against the worn leather while 3 pairs of eyes watched her from behind with a trust that threatened to break her heart every single day. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the road to Stockton in the summer of 1872. And at 22 years old, she had already buried both parents and promised them with her last breath in their presence that she would keep the family together no matter what it took. Her sister Molly was 8 years old, with braids that Penelope tried to keep neat despite the endless dust that covered everything they owned. Her brother James was 10, with their father's serious eyes and a determination to be the man of the family that sometimes made Penelope want to weep. The youngest was little Sarah, barely 5 years old, who still asked for Mama in her sleep and clung to Penelope's skirts like they were the only solid thing left in the world. The cholera had taken their mother first, back in Missouri, and then their father had tried to push on toward California anyway, convinced that the land and opportunity waiting there would save them all. He had made it as far as the Nevada territory before the fever took him too, and Penelope had driven the wagon the rest of the way herself, following the rutted tracks and praying to God that she would not lose her way or lose another soul she loved. Stockton rose from the flat land like a promise, buildings clustered together near the waterways that made the town prosper. It was not as grand as San Francisco, but it was growing, filled with miners and farmers and people trying to carve out new lives in the West. Penelope had an address clutched in her pocket, written in her father's shaking hand before he died. A distant cousin who might take them in, or at least point them toward work and shelter. The cousin turned out to be a tired woman with 6 children of her own, living in a 2-room house that already bulged at the seams. She gave Penelope a sympathetic look and a meal, but nothing more. There was no room, no resources, no help to spare. "There is a boarding house on 5th Street, the cousin said, her voice genuinely regretful. "Mrs. Chen runs it. She is a fair woman. You might find work there, and she sometimes lets working girls bring their families." Penelope thanked her and left before the children could see her cry. She found the boarding house as the sun began to set, a sturdy 2-story building with a neat garden in front that spoke of someone who cared about order and beauty, even in this rough town. Mrs. Chen was indeed fair, and also shrewd. She looked at Penelope's worn dress, her calloused hands, and the 3 children who stood behind her like a small wall of need. "You can clean and cook?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, madam. I can sew and do laundry too. I can work from dawn until dark if you need me." The children. "They will not be trouble. Molly can help with light chores. James is good with animals and fixing things. Sarah is quiet." Mrs. Chen studied them all for a long moment. "I have a room in the attic. It is small. You would share it with all 3 children. In exchange for the room and meals, you work for me. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, whatever I need. I will pay you $2 a week beyond that." $2 a week was almost nothing, but it was a roof and food and safety. Penelope agreed immediately. The attic room had a sloped ceiling and 1 window that looked out over the street. There was a bed large enough for Penelope and the girls if they squeezed together, and a narrow cot for James. Their few belongings fit in a single trunk. That first night, Penelope held Sarah close and listened to the sounds of the boarding house settling around them, the murmur of men's voices from below, the creak of floorboards, the distant sound of a piano from a saloon down the street. "Are we home now?" Sarah whispered. Penelope kissed her forehead. "We are safe now. That is what matters." The work was endless and exhausting. Mrs. Chen ran a tight establishment, and her boarders expected clean sheets, hot meals, and no dust on the furniture. Penelope rose before dawn to start the cooking fires and fell into bed long after the children were asleep. Her hands grew rough and her back ached constantly, but they had food in their bellies and a place to sleep, and she told herself that was enough. James tried to help however he could, chopping wood and hauling water until Penelope worried he would grow up too fast and miss the childhood he deserved. Molly watched Sarah during the day and helped fold laundry, her small fingers nimble with the cloth. Sarah drew pictures in the dirt of the garden and talked to the chickens Mrs. Chen kept in a coop behind the house. 3 months passed this way, each day blending into the next in a haze of work and worry. Penelope began to believe this was simply how life would be forever, that she would work herself to the bone in this boarding house until the children were grown, and perhaps that would be enough. She had kept her promise. They were together. Then Nathan Thorne walked into the boarding house on a cold October morning, and everything changed. He had to duck his head to come through the door. A massive man with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the entire entryway. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered from years in the mountains. He wore buckskin and wool, practical clothes that had seen hard use, and he carried a rifle with the ease of a man who knew how to use it. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands large and scarred from work, and when he looked at Penelope with eyes the color of a winter sky, she felt something in her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I need a room," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I will be in town for the winter. I can pay in advance." Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked Nathan up and down with her sharp eyes and quoted a price. He counted out coins without arguing, more money than Penelope had seen in months. "You are a trapper?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, madam. I bring my furs down from the mountains each fall and stay in town until spring. I have stayed here before, 3 years ago. I remember. You were quiet and caused no trouble. The same room is available if you want it." "That would be fine." Penelope realized she was staring and quickly looked away, busying herself with the breakfast dishes. But she felt his presence like a physical thing, a warmth and solidity that seemed to change the very air in the house. Nathan Thorne settled into the boarding house like a bear finding a winter den. He was quiet, as Mrs. Chen had said, keeping to himself and speaking little. But Penelope noticed things about him in the days that followed. He was always polite, thanking her for meals and never leaving a mess in his room. He fixed a broken step on the back porch without being asked, and when he saw James struggling to split a particularly stubborn piece of firewood, he took the axe and did it himself with 3 powerful swings that made it look effortless. "You are strong," James said, his eyes wide with admiration. Nathan handed him the split wood. "You will be too when you are grown. You are doing good work helping your sister." James stood a little straighter after that, and Penelope felt a rush of gratitude toward this quiet mountain man who had taken a moment to encourage a boy who desperately needed to hear that he mattered. A week after Nathan arrived, Penelope was in the garden hanging laundry when she heard Sarah crying. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart in her throat. Sarah was sitting in the dirt near the chicken coop, her knee scraped and bleeding, tears streaming down her face. Before Penelope could reach her, Nathan was there. He must have been in the stable behind the boarding house, and he moved with surprising speed for such a large man. He crouched down beside Sarah, his massive frame somehow gentle as he examined her knee. "That is a good scrape," he said seriously, "but I think you will survive. May I carry you inside so your sister can clean it?" Sarah nodded, still sniffling, and Nathan picked her up as if she weighed nothing. He carried her into the kitchen and set her carefully on a chair, then stepped back to let Penelope take over. But he did not leave. He stood by the door, watching with those winter sky eyes as Penelope cleaned the scrape and bandaged it with a strip of clean cloth. "Thank you," Penelope said, looking up at him. "You did not have to help. She was hurt. Of course I helped." There was something in the way he said it, simple and matter-of-fact, that made Penelope's throat tight. As if helping a crying child was the most natural thing in the world, not an imposition or a burden. "You are good with children," she said quietly. Something flickered across his face, gone too quickly for her to read. "I had younger siblings once, a long time ago." He left before she could ask more, but Penelope found herself thinking about him as she finished the laundry, wondering about this mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness but knew how to comfort a crying child. The weather turned colder as November arrived, and Penelope worried constantly about keeping the children warm. The attic room was drafty, and their blankets were thin. She began setting aside every penny she could from her wages, hoping to buy wool fabric to make warmer clothes before the real winter set in. Nathan noticed. Of course he noticed, because he seemed to notice everything with those quiet, watchful eyes. One evening, he came downstairs carrying a bundle of furs, thick beaver and mink pelts that would fetch good prices from the traders. "These are extra," he said, handing them to Penelope. "You can use them for blankets for the children." Penelope stared at the furs, speechless. They represented money, significant money, far more than she could ever afford to pay him. "I cannot accept these. They are too valuable. They are just sitting in my room. Better that children stay warm. Please let me pay you something. I can give you $1 a week until—" "No." His voice was firm but not unkind. "They are a gift. Children should not be cold at night." He walked away before she could argue further, and Penelope stood holding the furs with tears in her eyes. That night, the children slept under the soft pelts, and for the first time since they had arrived in Stockton, they were truly warm. Penelope began to watch Nathan more carefully after that, trying to understand this man who gave away valuable furs and fixed broken steps, and spoke kindly to children who were not his own. He was not like the other boarders, rough miners and farmhands who spoke loudly and sometimes smelled of whiskey. Nathan was quiet and controlled, moving through the world with a careful deliberation that spoke of years lived in places where a mistake could mean death. She found herself timing her chores so she might see him more often. She made sure his favorite dishes appeared at meals. She darned a tear in his shirt without being asked and left it folded outside his door. Small things, the only things she had to offer. One Sunday afternoon when Mrs. Chen gave her a rare few hours of freedom, Penelope took the children to the park near the waterfront. It was a clear day, cold but bright, and she wanted them to have a chance to play and be children instead of working or staying quiet in the boarding house. They ran and shouted, and Sarah picked handfuls of the last autumn wildflowers while Molly helped her weave them into a chain. Penelope sat on a bench and watched them, feeling a moment of peace that had been rare in her life. Then James called out, "Mr. Thorne, look at this." She turned and saw Nathan walking toward them, and her heart did that strange, tightening thing again. He was dressed in his usual buckskin and wool, his long hair loose around his shoulders, and he looked like something from another time, wild and untamed. James was showing him a smooth river stone he had found, and Nathan examined it with genuine interest, turning it over in his large hands. "That is a good stone. See the stripes. That is from minerals in the water laid down over many years." "How many years?" "More years than you can imagine. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands." James' eyes went wide and he clutched the stone like treasure. Nathan looked up and met Penelope's gaze, and something passed between them, a connection she did not have words for. "I did not mean to interrupt your afternoon," he said, walking over to her bench. "I was just walking by the water." "You are not interrupting. The children like you, I like them too." He said it simply, as if it were just a fact. "They are good children. You are doing well with them." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am trying. It is harder than I thought it would be." "Worthwhile things usually are." He hesitated, then asked, "May I sit?" She nodded, and he settled onto the bench beside her. He was so large that it felt like the bench shrank, his presence overwhelming in a way that should have been frightening but somehow was not. They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play, and Penelope found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. "How long have you been alone with them?" Nathan asked quietly. "Since June. Our father died in Nevada, our mother before that back in Missouri." "That is a heavy burden for you to carry. They are my family. What else could I do?" He looked at her with those winter sky eyes, and she saw something like respect there. Many people would have given up, given them to an orphanage or split them up among relatives. "I promised my parents I would keep us together." Her voice was fierce despite her exhaustion. "I will not break that promise." "No," Nathan said softly. "I do not think you will." They talked more that afternoon than they had in all the weeks since he had arrived. Nathan told her about the mountains, the high peaks and hidden valleys where he trapped through the long winters. He spoke of the silence up there, the way the snow muffled everything and you could go weeks without seeing another human soul. He told her about tracking animals through the forest and reading the signs they left behind, the language of the wilderness that most people never learned. In turn, Penelope told him about her childhood in Missouri, when both her parents were alive and life had been simpler. She told him about her mother's garden and her father's dream of land in California, a dream that had died with him on the trail west. "You regret coming here?" Nathan asked. "No. There was nothing left for us in Missouri. At least here we have a chance." "You have more than a chance. You have already survived something that would have broken most people." His words settled into her like warmth, like the feeling of the sun on her face after a long, cold night. She realized with a start that she had not felt alone in this moment, not felt the crushing weight of responsibility that usually pressed down on her every waking hour. Just for this afternoon, sitting on this bench with this quiet mountain man beside her, she felt like perhaps she did not have to carry everything by herself. The children ran back to them as the sun began to sink lower, their cheeks flushed with cold and happiness. Sarah climbed into Penelope's lap, while Molly chattered about the birds they had seen. James stood close to Nathan, still clutching his river stone, and Penelope saw the way the boy looked at the mountain man with a hope and hunger that made her chest ache. He needed a father figure, someone strong and steady to look up to. They all needed more than she could give them alone. Nathan walked them back to the boarding house as dusk fell, his presence solid and protective beside them in the gathering dark. When they reached the door, he paused and looked down at Penelope. "Thank you for letting me spend the afternoon with you," he said. "Thank you for caring about them," she replied. "It means more than you know." Something shifted in his expression, became warmer and more open. "They are easy to care about, so are you." He left before she could respond, disappearing up the stairs to his room, and Penelope stood in the entryway with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. So are you. What did that mean? Was she reading too much into simple kindness from a man who would leave in the spring and return to his mountains? But over the following weeks, it became clear that Nathan's interest was more than just kindness. He began finding excuses to be near her, helping carry heavy loads of laundry, fixing things around the boarding house that Mrs. Chen had long since given up on, joining them in the kitchen after meals to help wash dishes while the children dried and put away. He was careful and respectful, never improper, but there was a warmth in the way he looked at her that made Penelope's pulse quicken. He also spent more time with the children, and Penelope watched in amazement as they bloomed under his attention. James began following him around like a shadow, learning how to properly sharpen a knife and mend leather and all the practical skills that Nathan carried from his life in the wilderness. Molly became braver, asking him questions about animals and plants, storing away his answers like precious coins. Even shy Sarah began to seek him out, bringing him her drawings and sitting near him in the evenings when he carved small figures from scraps of wood. December arrived with cold rains that turned the streets to mud and kept everyone inside. The boarding house felt smaller and more cramped, but also warmer somehow, filled with the quiet presence of this mountain man who had become part of their daily lives without Penelope quite realizing how it had happened. On Christmas Eve, the boarding house was nearly empty, most of the men having gone to the saloons or to spend the holiday with friends. Mrs. Chen had given Penelope the evening off, a rare gift, and she sat in the kitchen with the children, trying to make the day feel special despite having almost nothing to give them. Nathan came downstairs carrying packages wrapped in brown paper and twine. He set them on the table with a slightly embarrassed look, as if unsure of his welcome. "I thought the children might like these," he said. James unwrapped his package to find a small knife in a leather sheath, perfectly sized for a boy's hand. His face lit up with joy that was almost painful to see. Molly received a book about birds of California, the pages filled with detailed drawings. Sarah got a carved wooden doll with jointed arms and legs and a face Nathan had painted with careful detail. The children thanked him with enthusiastic hugs, even shy Sarah, and Nathan looked pleased but uncomfortable with the attention. Then he pulled out one more package, smaller than the others, and handed it to Penelope. "This is for you." Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a beautiful pair of gloves, soft leather lined with rabbit fur, clearly made by his own skilled hands. They would keep her warm during the cold winter mornings when she hung laundry and hauled water. "Nathan, I cannot accept this. You have already given us so much, please." His voice was quiet but intense. "Let me give you something. You work so hard for everyone else. Let someone care for you too." She looked up at him and saw something in his face that made her breath catch. This was not just kindness. This was something deeper, something that both terrified and thrilled her. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping the gloves onto her hands. "They fit perfectly. They are beautiful." The children begged Nathan to stay for the evening, and Penelope added her own invitation, her heart in her throat. He agreed, and they spent Christmas Eve together in the kitchen, talking and laughing while the children played with their gifts. Mrs. Chen had left them an apple pie, and Penelope served it with cream while Nathan told stories of Christmases in the mountains, of decorating trees for the animals and singing carols to the stars. Later, after the children had finally gone to bed, Penelope and Nathan sat alone in the kitchen with cups of hot cider. The house was quiet around them, peaceful and warm. "This has been the best Christmas I have had in years," Penelope said softly. "Thank you for making it special for them." "It has been the best Christmas I have had in years too," Nathan replied. He hesitated, then added, "I have been alone for a long time, Penelope. I forgot what it felt like to be part of something, to have people to care about." "What happened to your family? You mentioned siblings." Pain flickered across his face. "Scarlet fever when I was 18. My parents and 2 younger sisters all gone within a week. I was in the mountains on a hunting trip with my uncle. By the time I got back, they had already been buried." "Oh, Nathan, I am so sorry. It was a long time ago." 14 years. But it is why I went to the mountains and stayed there. Easier to be alone than to risk losing anyone again. Penelope reached across the table and took his hand, her small fingers curling around his much larger ones. His skin was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "I understand that fear," she said quietly. "Every day I am terrified that something will happen to one of the children, that I will fail them, that I am not enough." Nathan turned his hand so their palms pressed together, his fingers interlacing with hers. "You are enough. You are more than enough. You are the strongest person I have ever met. I do not feel strong. I feel exhausted and scared most of the time. That is what strength is. Being exhausted and scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." He paused, then continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You have made me want things I stopped letting myself want a long time ago. A family, a home, people to come back to at the end of the day." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Nathan, I know I have nothing to offer. I live in a cabin in the mountains for most of the year. I have no land, no security, just what I can trap and trade. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who can give you and the children a real home, a real life. You think you have nothing to offer." Penelope's voice shook with emotion. "You have given us more in 3 months than anyone else has in our entire lives. You have given us your time and your attention and your care. You have made James believe he can be strong. You have made Molly brave enough to ask questions. You have made Sarah feel safe. And you have made me feel like I am not alone in this impossible task. That is everything, Nathan. That is more than I ever hoped to have." He stared at her, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Are you saying—" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you." The words came out in a rush, terrifying and liberating at the same time. "I did not mean to. I know it is foolish and impractical and you will leave in the spring, but I cannot help it. I love you." Nathan stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. For a horrible moment, Penelope thought he was going to leave, going to walk away from her confession. But instead he came around the table and pulled her to her feet, his large hands gentle on her arms. "It is not foolish," he said, his voice fierce. "And I will only leave in the spring if you tell me to. Because I love you too, Penelope Sanders. I have loved you since I saw you in the garden, working yourself to exhaustion for those children. I have loved you every day since, watching you be brave and strong and kind no matter how hard things get. I love you and I love your siblings like they were my own, and if you will have me, I want to build a life with all of you." Then he kissed her, and Penelope felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His lips were warm and gentle despite his size, asking rather than demanding, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, she was crying and smiling at the same time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will have you, we all will." Nathan pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin, and she felt the solid strength of him surrounding her like a wall against the world. For the first time since her parents died, Penelope felt truly safe. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreams. Nathan told her about his cabin in the mountains, a sturdy structure near a clear stream with good hunting and fishing. It was isolated but beautiful, and he could expand it to make room for a family. He had money saved from years of trapping, enough to buy some land and livestock, to build something permanent. "We could stay here through the winter," he said. "Get married if you are willing. In the spring, we move to the mountains together. I can teach you and the children how to live up there. It will be hard work, but we will be together." "I have never been afraid of hard work," Penelope smiled up at him. "And the children love you already. They will be so happy." "I want to adopt them legally," Nathan said seriously. "Make them mine in the eyes of the law." They will have my name and my protection. No one will ever be able to separate them from us." Tears streamed down Penelope's face again, but they were tears of joy this time. "You would do that. They are already mine in my heart. I want to make it official." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The next morning, Christmas Day, they told the children together. James whooped with joy and threw his arms around Nathan's waist. Molly cried happy tears and hugged Penelope tight. Sarah looked between them with her serious 5-year-old eyes and asked, "Does this mean Mr. Thorne will be our papa?" Nathan crouched down to her level, his massive frame folding so he could look her in the eyes. "Yes, if you want me to be. I know I cannot replace your real father. But I will love you and protect you and be here for you always. All three of you." Sarah thought about this for a moment, then nodded decisively and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I want you to be our papa." Nathan closed his eyes and held her close, and Penelope saw his shoulders shake slightly. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. Mrs. Chen was delighted by the news and immediately began planning a wedding. She knew the pastor at the Methodist church and promised to arrange everything. The wedding would be small but proper, she declared, and she would make sure Penelope had a decent dress to wear. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and happiness. Nathan spent his days working alongside James, teaching the boy everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. He taught him how to read tracks in the snow, how to set snares for rabbits, how to identify which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. James soaked it all up like parched earth drinking rain, growing more confident with each passing day. Molly helped Penelope sew new clothes for everyone, her stitches neat and precise. Nathan had bought fabric with some of his savings, good sturdy wool and cotton that would serve them well in the mountains. As they worked, Penelope told Molly about what their new life would be like, preparing her for the changes ahead. "Will there be other children there?" Molly asked. "No, probably not nearby, but we will have each other and we will come down to town several times a year for supplies and to visit." "Will you have babies with Mr. Thorne?" The question was asked with innocent curiosity, and Penelope felt her cheeks flush. "Perhaps someday." "Would that bother you?" Molly considered this seriously. "No, I think it would be nice. I could help take care of them like you take care of us." "You will always be my sister and my priority," Penelope assured her. "Nothing will ever change that." Nathan carved wooden animals for Sarah, a whole barnyard of creatures that she played with for hours. He also started teaching her letters, patient with her struggles and enthusiastic about her successes. She followed him everywhere when he was in the boarding house, her small hand tucked into his large one, and he never seemed to tire of her constant questions. The wedding took place on a cold January morning in 1873, with Mrs. Chen and a few of the boarding house residents as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress of deep blue wool that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar that had been her mother's. Nathan wore new clothes too, dark trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders and muscular build. He had trimmed his beard and tied his long hair back, and Penelope thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. The pastor spoke about commitment and love, about building a life together on the foundation of faith and hard work. When it came time for the vows, Nathan took both of Penelope's hands in his and spoke in a voice that rang clear through the small church. "I vow to love you and protect you all the days of my life. I vow to be a father to your siblings and to honor the memory of those who came before me. I vow to work hard and be faithful and build a home where we can all be safe and happy. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Penelope repeated the traditional vows, but then added her own. "I vow to stand beside you through whatever comes. I vow to be a partner worthy of your strength and kindness. I vow to honor you and love you and make a home wherever we are, as long as we are together. This, I swear before God and these witnesses." When the pastor pronounced them married and Nathan kissed her, Penelope felt like everything she had lost and everything she had fought for had led to this moment. She was no longer alone. They were no longer alone. The children cheered, and James declared loudly that this was the best day ever. Mrs. Chen had prepared a wedding breakfast back at the boarding house, a feast that must have cost her dearly, and they all celebrated together. It was nothing like the grand weddings Penelope had heard about, with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations, but it was perfect because it was theirs. That night, in the small attic room that Penelope had shared with the children, Nathan came to her as her husband. The children were sleeping in his old room for the night, giving them privacy, and Penelope was nervous and excited and scared all at once. Nathan sensed her nervousness and was gentle, patient, taking his time and making sure she felt cherished and safe. He kissed her slowly and thoroughly, his large hands careful on her body, and when they finally came together, Penelope felt a completion she had not known she was missing. Afterwards, he held her close and stroked her hair and told her she was beautiful, and Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks from sheer, overwhelming emotion. "Are those happy tears?" Nathan asked, concern in his voice. "Yes, I just never thought I could have this. I thought I would spend the rest of my life working and worrying and being alone. I never imagined someone like you would want me." "Want you?" Nathan's voice was incredulous. "Penelope, you are everything I have ever wanted and never thought I would find. You are strong and brave and kind. You love with your whole heart. You have built a family from nothing but will and determination. I am the lucky one here." She kissed him then, putting all her love and gratitude into it, and they made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and what brought pleasure. When they finally fell asleep tangled together in the narrow bed, Penelope felt a peace that went bone deep. The following weeks were spent in final preparations for the move to the mountains. Nathan sold his remaining furs and used the money to buy supplies, tools, a good milk cow, chickens in crates, and a sturdy mule to help carry everything. He also filed the legal papers to adopt James, Molly, and Sarah, and the day the adoption became official, he gave each of them a carved wooden medallion with their new name, Thorne. "You are mine now," he told them, his voice thick with emotion. "My children, my family forever." James wore his medallion on a leather cord around his neck and refused to take it off even to sleep. Molly tucked hers into the pocket of her dress, touching it frequently as if to make sure it was still there. Sarah carried hers everywhere, showing it to anyone who would look. In late February, they loaded the wagon and said goodbye to Mrs. Chen, who pressed packages of food into their hands and made them promise to visit. Then they turned the wagon toward the mountains, toward the high country where Nathan had lived alone for so many years. The journey took 3 days, following rough trails that climbed steadily upward through forests of pine and cedar. The air grew colder and cleaner, and snow appeared on the ground in patches that became deeper the higher they went. Nathan pointed out landmarks and told stories about his years in these mountains, and Penelope watched the children's faces fill with wonder at this wild new world. The cabin appeared around a bend in the trail, nestled in a clearing beside a stream that chuckled over smooth rocks. It was larger than Penelope had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Nathan had clearly put years of work into making it comfortable, and she felt a rush of love for this man who had built himself a home in the wilderness. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. It will need work to fit us all, Nathan said. I will add another room for the children and a better root cellar and enlarge the barn for the animals. But the bones are good. It will keep us safe and warm. They spent the rest of the winter settling in. Nathan was true to his word, working from dawn to dusk to expand the cabin and make improvements. James helped him cut and haul logs, growing stronger with the work. Penelope and Molly set up the interior, hanging curtains and arranging their few possessions to make the cabin feel like home. Sarah helped tend the chickens and collect eggs, delighted by this important job. The work was hard, but they were together, and that made everything worthwhile. In the evenings, they gathered around the fire while Nathan told stories or taught them songs. Penelope cooked meals from the supplies they had brought and the game Nathan hunted, learning to make do with what they had. It was a simple life, but it was good. Spring came slowly to the mountains, snow melting to reveal green meadows filled with wildflowers. Nathan took them on long walks, teaching them about the plants and animals, showing them the secret places he had discovered in his years alone. Penelope watched him with the children and fell in love with him more deeply every day. He was patient and kind, firm when he needed to be, but always fair, exactly the father they needed. One evening in April, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Nathan pulled Penelope close and rested his hand on her belly. "Are you going to tell me, or should I wait for you to be ready?" Penelope looked up at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "You have been tired in the mornings. Your appetite has changed, and there is something different about your face, a glow," he smiled. "I have seen enough pregnant animals to recognize the signs." She laughed and swatted his arm. "Comparing me to pregnant animals, are you? Only in the best way." He turned serious. "How do you feel about it? I know we have only been married a few months." "I feel happy," Penelope said honestly, "and scared, but mostly happy. I want to have your children, Nathan." He kissed her thoroughly, his joy evident in every touch. "I want that too. I want to fill this cabin with life and love and laughter." They told the children that evening, and the reactions were exactly what Penelope had hoped for. James puffed up with pride at the idea of being a big brother. Molly immediately began planning how she would help with the baby. Sarah wanted to know if it would be a boy or a girl, and could they name it after their mama if it was a girl. "We will see," Penelope said, pulling Sarah into her lap. "But that is a lovely idea." The baby came in December, during the first big snow of the season. Nathan had brought a midwife from Stockton in November to stay with them for the last month of the pregnancy. A practical woman named Mrs. Morrison, who had delivered dozens of babies and feared nothing. When Penelope's labor started in the middle of the night, Nathan held her hand and murmured encouragement, while Mrs. Morrison worked with calm efficiency. The pain was intense, worse than anything Penelope had imagined, and there were moments when she thought she could not endure another second. But Nathan never left her side, his presence steady and solid, and when the baby finally emerged with a strong, angry cry, Penelope wept with relief and joy. "A boy," Mrs. Morrison announced, handing the baby to Penelope after cleaning him up. "Healthy and loud. Congratulations." Penelope looked down at her son, his tiny face red and scrunched, his fists waving angrily, and felt a wave of love so powerful it was almost painful. Nathan leaned over them both, his large finger gently touching the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers immediately curled around it. "Hello, little one," Nathan said softly, his voice full of wonder. "Welcome to the family." They named him Peter after Penelope's father, and he became the darling of the entire household. The children were endlessly fascinated by him, taking turns holding him and helping with his care. James carved him a rattle from a piece of cedar. Molly sang him songs. Sarah told him long, rambling stories about the chickens and the mountain and the flowers they would pick in the spring. Nathan was a devoted father, walking the floor with Peter when he cried at night, changing his diapers without complaint, carrying him in a sling against his broad chest while he did chores. Watching this massive mountain man be so gentle with their tiny son made Penelope fall in love with him all over again. The years that followed were full of hard work and deep happiness. They added more rooms to the cabin as their family grew. 2 years after Peter came a daughter they named Clara, with Penelope's dark hair and Nathan's blue eyes. Then 2 years after that came another son, Jack, who was placid and cheerful from the moment he was born. James grew into a strong young man, learning everything Nathan could teach him about the mountains and developing into a skilled hunter and trapper in his own right. When he turned 18, he announced his intention to stake his own claim further up the mountain, and though Penelope's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, she knew he was ready. He built his own cabin a half-day's ride away, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have his independence. Molly became a beautiful young woman with a keen mind and a love of learning. Nathan made sure she had books, ordering them from Stockton and teaching her himself when there was no school to attend. When she was 19, she met a young schoolteacher during one of their trips to town, and Penelope watched her daughter's face light up in a way that she remembered from her own courtship with Nathan. The teacher, a kind man named William, courted Molly properly, and they married the following year in the same little church where Penelope and Nathan had wed. Sarah grew up wild and free in the mountains, more comfortable tracking deer than sowing samplers. She had Nathan's fearlessness and Penelope's determination, and she announced at 12 years old that she was never getting married. She was going to live in the mountains forever and have adventures. Penelope and Nathan exchanged amused looks and decided not to argue. There would be time enough for Sarah to figure out what she wanted from life. The 3 younger children grew up surrounded by love and security, never knowing the fear and hunger that had marked Penelope's early years with James, Molly, and Sarah. They learned to ride and hunt and fish, to identify plants and track animals, to work hard and appreciate the beauty of the wild places they called home. Penelope's life was nothing like what she had imagined when she drove that wagon toward Stockton with 3 frightened children and almost no hope. Instead of a life of endless work and worry, she had built something beautiful with Nathan. They worked hard, yes, but they worked together, sharing both the burdens and the joys. The cabin in the mountains became a true home, filled with laughter and love and the chaos of a large, happy family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Penelope on a walk to a high meadow he had discovered years before. It was summer, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, the air sweet with their scent. They sat together on a fallen log, looking out over the mountains that had become their kingdom. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Leaving town to live up here, it is a hard life." "Never," Penelope said firmly. "This is everything I ever wanted and never thought I could have. A home. A family. Someone who loves me and lets me love him back. How could I regret that?" "I think about where I was before I met you," Nathan said quietly. "Living alone, going through the motions, convinced I would never let myself care about anyone again. You changed everything. You and those 3 scared children who needed help. You saved me as much as I helped you." Penelope took his hand, his palm still rough with calluses after all these years. "We saved each other. That is what love does. It makes us strong enough to face things we could never face alone." "I love you, Penelope Thorne, more today than when I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "I love you too, always." They kissed in that high meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and mountains, and Penelope felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time she saw Nathan duck through the door of the boarding house. Some things never faded, no matter how many years passed. That winter, James brought home a young woman he wanted to marry, a tough frontier girl named Rebecca who had grown up on a ranch and knew how to work. Penelope welcomed her warmly, seeing in Rebecca the same determination and strength that she herself had possessed at that age. They married in the spring, and a year later, Penelope became a grandmother when Rebecca gave birth to a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Penelope marveled at how far they had all come. From that desperate day in Stockton when she had stood at Mrs. Chen's door with 3 orphan children and $2 to her name, to this moment of holding the next generation, loved and safe and surrounded by family. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking about how grateful I am, for all of it. Even the hard parts because they led us here." Nathan wrapped his arms around her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "I am grateful too, every single day." Sarah, true to her word, never married. She became a guide for hunters and travelers, one of the few women in the territory willing to lead expeditions into the high mountains. She was respected and even feared a little, this fierce woman who could outshoot most men and track a deer over solid rock. She built her own small cabin near James and lived exactly the life she wanted, wild and free and independent. Penelope worried about her sometimes, but Nathan just laughed and said Sarah had too much of both of them in her to ever be ordinary. Peter and Clara and Jack grew up and made their own choices. Peter became a rancher, buying land in the valley and building a successful cattle operation. Clara married a doctor and moved to Sacramento, though she visited often and wrote letters filled with news of city life. Jack surprised them all by becoming a teacher, inspired by Molly's husband William, and opened a school in Stockton for children of miners and farmers. Through it all, Penelope and Nathan remained the center around which the family orbited. Their cabin in the mountains became a gathering place, somewhere all their children and grandchildren knew they could return to find love and acceptance, and a home-cooked meal. Holidays were loud, chaotic affairs with multiple generations crammed into the expanded cabin, and Penelope loved every overwhelming moment of it. She never forgot the fear and desperation of those early days, but they became part of the story she told, rather than the reality she lived. The story of a girl who had lost everything but refused to give up. The story of a mountain man who had closed himself off from the world until he met a woman and 3 children who needed him. The story of how they had built a life together that became something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined alone. On Penelope's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin. All 6 of their children were there, along with their spouses, and a veritable horde of grandchildren who ran shrieking through the meadow and splashed in the stream and climbed trees with fearless abandon. Penelope stood on the porch watching them, Nathan beside her as always, his hair gray now but his body still strong and solid. "Look at what we made," she said softly, gesturing to the chaos of family spread out before them. "Look at all this love." "It started with you," Nathan said. "Your courage and your refusal to give up. Everything good in my life came from you. No, it came from us, together." She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side despite the decades that had passed. "I could not have done any of this without you. You would have found a way." "You always find a way." "Maybe. But it would not have been as good, it would not have been as happy. You made all the difference, Nathan. You still do." They stood together watching their family. This loud, chaotic, beautiful testament to the power of love and determination. And refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink, and Penelope felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. This was what she had fought for, those long years ago when she drove a wagon full of orphan children toward an uncertain future. This was what she had promised her dying parents she would achieve, not just survival but thriving, not just keeping the family together but expanding it, growing it, building something that would last for generations. And she had done it. They had done it together. That evening, after the birthday feast and the presents and the laughter, after the grandchildren had been put to bed in every available corner of the cabin, and the adults sat around the fire telling stories, James stood up to make a toast. "To my sister," he said, raising his glass. "Who was more than a sister. Who was mother and father and everything we needed when we had nothing. Who refused to let us be separated no matter how hard it got. Who worked herself to exhaustion every day to keep us fed and clothed and together. Who found us a father when we desperately needed one, and who built this family through sheer force of will and more love than I knew one person could contain. To Penelope." "To Penelope," everyone echoed, and Penelope felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around at all these people who existed because she had refused to give up. "And to Nathan," Molly added, standing with her own glass. "Who saw a woman struggling with 3 children who were not his and decided to help anyway. Who gave us a home and a father's love and taught us how to be strong. Who made our sister happy and gave her a life she deserved. Who expanded our family and loved every one of us like we had always been his. To Nathan." "To Nathan," everyone repeated, and Nathan ducked his head in his characteristic way, uncomfortable with praise but clearly moved. "To all of us," Sarah said, standing and raising her glass with a fierce grin. "To being stubborn and refusing to quit, to building something impossible, to family, blood, or chosen, to the Thornes." "To the Thornes," everyone shouted, and the sound echoed through the cabin and out into the mountains beyond. Later, much later, when everyone had finally gone to sleep, and the cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and the soft sounds of sleeping children, Penelope and Nathan sat together in the darkness of their room. "I never thanked you properly," Penelope said quietly. "For everything you have given me, for loving me and the children, for building this life with me." "You thank me every day," Nathan replied, "by being who you are, by loving me back, by making me the happiest man alive." "I mean it, though. You saved us, all of us." "No, Penelope. You saved yourself and them long before I came along. I just had the privilege of joining something already beautiful and making it a little easier." She turned to him in the darkness, finding his face with her hands and pulling him down for a kiss. After 25 years of marriage, his kisses still made her heart race. Some things, she thought, never stopped being magic. They made love slowly and quietly, mindful of the sleeping family surrounding them, and afterwards Penelope lay in Nathan's arms and felt the same bone-deep peace she had felt on their wedding night. This was where she belonged. This was what home felt like. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows in the way that life always does. They lost Mrs. Chen to old age and made the trip to Stockton for her funeral, remembering the kindness she had shown them when they needed it most. They gained more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, the family tree spreading and branching in ways that amazed Penelope every time she tried to count everyone. Nathan's hair turned white and his steps grew slower, but he never lost the strength that had first drawn Penelope to him. He still chopped wood and hunted and took care of the family with the same devoted determination he had always shown. Penelope's hair grayed and her hands developed arthritis that made sewing difficult. But she still cooked for the family and told stories to the grandchildren and kept the cabin running smoothly. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party that brought family from across California. They had written to everyone, gathered them all together, and the cabin and surrounding meadow were filled with thorns of all ages. Someone had even hired a photographer from Sacramento, and they took a formal portrait of Penelope and Nathan surrounded by all 6 of their children, and as many grandchildren and great-grandchildren as they could fit in the frame. Looking at that photograph later, Penelope marveled at the sheer number of people who existed, because she and Nathan had found each other in a boarding house in Stockton 40 years before. Every person in that picture was a testament to their love, to their refusal to give up, to the family they had built from nothing but determination and hope. "We did good," Nathan said, looking at the photograph with her. "We did very good," Penelope agreed. They lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, celebrated with less fanfare but no less love. By then, Nathan had trouble walking and Penelope's eyesight was failing, but they still had each other, and that was enough. They spent their days sitting on the porch of the cabin they had built together, watching the mountains change with the seasons and remembering all the years they had shared. "You remember the first time you saw me?" Penelope asked him one warm summer evening. "Of course." "You were in the garden at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, hanging laundry. Your hair was falling out of its pins and you had dirt on your nose and you looked exhausted and determined and beautiful. I thought to myself that you were the kind of woman who could survive anything. And what do you think now? That I was right. But also that you should not have had to survive alone. I am glad I got to be here with you. So am I. I love you, Nathan Thorne. I love you, Penelope Thorne. Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains one more time, hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had built together. And in that moment, Penelope felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with anything she had accomplished or anything she owned. It was simply the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. Having lived a life full of meaning and love, Nathan passed quietly in his sleep the following winter, his heart simply stopping after 82 years of beating strong and true. Penelope woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, and though her grief was deep and overwhelming, she also felt a strange gratitude that he had not suffered, had not lingered in pain. He had lived fully and died peacefully, surrounded by family and love. The entire family gathered for his funeral, which was held in the meadow near the cabin with the mountains rising behind them. James spoke about the father Nathan had been to him, teaching him to be a man. Molly talked about his patience and kindness. Sarah told stories that made everyone laugh through their tears about his strength and his quiet sense of humor. All the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren shared memories, and when it was done, they buried him on the hillside overlooking the valley, where he could watch over the land he had loved. Penelope stayed in the cabin for 2 more years, cared for by her children who took turns staying with her. She told stories to the great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, about the mountain man who had helped her raise her siblings and loved them all. She made sure they understood what Nathan had been, how much he had given, how his love had changed everything. When Penelope finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, she was buried beside Nathan on that hillside. Her children arranged the funeral and made sure the whole family came to say goodbye to the woman who had started it all, the girl who had refused to let her family be broken apart, who had worked herself to exhaustion and never given up, who had built something beautiful from almost nothing. At her funeral, James's grandson, now grown with children of his own, read from a journal that Penelope had kept in her later years. One entry, written on their 40th anniversary, seemed to capture everything. I think about that scared young woman I was, driving a wagon toward Stockton with 3 orphaned children and almost no hope. I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I would fail. And I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that she would meet a mountain man who would change everything, that she would build a family and a life beyond anything she could imagine, that the love she would find would sustain her through decades and hardships and joys beyond measure, that she was stronger than she knew, but also that she would not have to be strong alone. That help was coming, in the form of a man with winter sky eyes and hands gentle despite their size and a heart big enough to hold all of us. I wish I could tell her to hold on, that the best was yet to come. But perhaps she would not have believed me. Perhaps she needed to walk through the fear to reach the joy. All I know is that I am grateful for every step of the journey, every struggle and triumph, because it led me to Nathan and to this life we built together. I am grateful beyond words. The family left flowers on the graves and went back to the cabin for the reception, and life continued the way it always does. But the legacy of Penelope and Nathan lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the stories that were told and the lessons that were passed down, in the understanding that family was worth fighting for, and love could transform everything. The cabin in the mountains remained in the family, passed down through the generations, a place where Thornes could always return to remember where they came from and the love that had started it all. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky gold and pink, those who were there sometimes swore they could feel the presence of the girl who had raised her siblings alone and the mountain man who had helped her raise them and loved them all, still watching over the family they had built together, still present in every act of love and courage and determination that defined the Thorne family for generations to come.